December 17, 1944. A checkpoint outside Iwala, Belgium. The jeep came to a halt beneath the gray wash of dawn. Frost clung to its fenders, its exhaust curling upward like ghostly breath. 3 soldiers sat inside, faces red from the cold. Their uniforms draped in the olive tones of the U.S. Army. They looked like Americans, spoke like Americans almost. But to Sergeant William Creel, something felt off. The cadence, perhaps. The way the middle one hesitated before answering. The air was silent except for the slow rhythm of idling, engines and the whisper of wind against snowbanks. Creel asked for the password. The men exchanged glances, too slow, too careful. He asked again. Their English fractured mid-sentence, vowels twisting in ways no Kentucky drawl or New York slang ever would. Then he saw it, the Sten guns, British weapons. No American patrol carried them. The confrontation was brief. By the time the snow had settled, 3 men were in custody, their true identities stripped bare beneath foreign cloth. Manfred Perus, Gunter Billing, Wilhelm Schmidt, German commandos disguised as American soldiers caught behind. Allied lines in the opening hours of Hitler's final gamble, the Battle of the Bulge. Their capture would ignite something far larger than a military incident. It would awaken a fever of distrust that swept across the Allied front-end. Invisible front line where identity itself became a weapon. But this story had begun long before that frozen morning in Belgium, back in the damp, smoke-filled corridors of Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia, where the dying empire's leader conceived one last act of audacity. October 22, 1944, Rastenburg. Adolf Hitler, gaunt and trembling, summoned SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny. The name alone carried weight. Months earlier, Skorzeny had stormed the mountain fortress of Gran Sasso, rescuing Benito Mussolini in a mission that seemed pulled from myth. He had kidnapped the son of Hungary's regent to force the nation to stay in the war. To Hitler, Skorzeny was the embodiment of ruthless ingenuity, man who could make miracles from desperation. Now, the Führer's hands trembled over the map of Western Europe, its rivers drawn in ink like veins of a dying body. He spoke of a counterattack, lightning thrust through the Ardennes, forests that would split the British and American armies, capture Antwerp, and perhaps in his mind, change the course of the war. But the plan required speed, and speed required deception. What Hitler proposed was something the laws of war could scarcely contain. German soldiers disguised as Americans, English on their tongues, Allied uniforms on their backs. They would infiltrate enemy lines, reverse road signs, misdirect convoys, sabotage bridges, and if fate allowed, capture crossings over the Meuse River before they could be destroyed. Skorzeny hesitated. The Hague Convention of 1907 made the consequences clear. If captured in enemy uniform, they would be executed as spies. No trial, no mercy. Hitler brushed the objection aside. Remove the uniforms before combat, he said, and international law remains unbroken. It was an answer of convenience, not conviction. But Skorzeny understood. His duty was not to debate legality. It was to make the impossible operational. Within days, orders went out across the Western Front. Volunteers fluent in English and familiar with American customs are requested for a secret mission. The response was both overwhelming and tragicomic. Thousands of German soldiers applied, lured by rumors of adventure or redemption. But few could speak English, let alone mimic the lazy inflections of an Ohio farm boy or the quick rhythm of a New Yorker. Of the 2,500 who gathered at Grafenwohr training camp in Bavaria, only 10 spoke English fluently. 30 more could manage a conversation. The rest could barely ask for directions. Skorzeny later wrote that the results were terrifying. Those who spoke little English were instructed, if challenged, to pretend illness, muttering, "Sorry," and clutching their stomachs as they hurried off. The theater of war had turned into literal theater, and failure meant death. Their training was exhaustive, absurd, and eerily modern. They studied American rank insignia, military slang, even body language, how to lean, how to curse, how to smoke. Captured American prisoners were used as tutors. Movies were screened nightly to teach accents and cultural rhythm. Maps glowed beneath their hands, trembling under lamplight as if the paper itself feared the orders it bore. They memorized everything from baseball scores to Frank Sinatra's latest hit. In the final days, they learned to chew gum and walk like G. Isa, grotesque mimicry of the very men they were meant to deceive. But deception required more than words. It required camouflage of steel. The Oberkommando der Wehrmacht promised Skorzeny American vehicles, Sherman tanks, jeeps, trucks to make the illusion complete. Almost none arrived. Instead, German Panthers were painted olive drab, adorned with white stars cut from sheet metal. They looked convincing only in the fog and darkness, illusions made of desperation. By December 16, 1944, Panzerbrigade 150 Skorzenys, disguised battalion, waited. In the forests, near the Schnee, Eifel, the air smelled of diesel and pine resin. Under a sky heavy with snow, Hitler's last great offensive began. More than 200,000 German troops surged through the Ardennes. Artillery fire thundered across the frozen ground. Searchlights carved the night open like scalpels. American lines bent under the weight of surprise. In the confusion, Skorzeny's commandos wearing stolen uniforms, driving captured jeeps slipped through. They reversed road signs, spread rumors of enemy breakthroughs, redirected convoys into dead ends, and cut telephone wires that linked entire divisions. One team even entered an American-held town, mapped its defenses, then vanished into the snow, leaving panic in its wake. For a few fleeting hours, the deception worked, but the battle's tempo soon betrayed them. The armored spearhead they relied on, Joachim Peiper's 1st SS Panzer, division was delayed by fierce resistance and fuel shortages. Without the rapid breakthrough, the commandos were stranded behind enemy lines, their disguises now death warrants. By December 17th, the plan was unraveling. At a lonely checkpoint near Awela, 3 infiltrators, Perus, Billing, and Schmidt were unmasked. Their capture exposed the operation. The effect was instant and viral. Across the Allied front, a wave of paranoia spread faster than any German advance. Every soldier became a suspect. Every conversation a test. American MPs began asking questions that no spy school could have prepared for. What's the capital of Illinois? Who won the World Series in 1940? Who is Mickey Mouse's girlfriend? Identity was no longer measured in uniform or language, but in culture, trivia, memory. A war fought in blood and steel had turned into a contest of belonging. The front froze, not from winter, but from mistrust. The morning after the arrests near Awela, the Allied command reeled. Reports flooded in of enemy soldiers speaking perfect English, directing tanks the wrong way, swapping road signs, cutting communications. Even Eisenhower's headquarters in Versailles felt the tremor. By dusk, a rumor began to coil through the ranks. German commandos were coming to kill Ike himself. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, was suddenly the most heavily guarded man in Europe. His motorcade routes were changed hourly. Entire roads were closed without warning. He was confined to his headquarters for days under armed escort, while every checkpoint from Paris to the Ardennes bristled with suspicion. The irony was brutal. The Germans had never planned an assassination. Yet the rumor, born from panic, achieved what bullets could not. It trapped the Allied High Command in a prison of their own making. Across Belgium and northern France, military police set up hundreds of roadblocks. Every jeep, every truck, every column of GIs was halted and interrogated. Soldiers were ordered to show their paybooks, to answer questions about baseball, state capitals, even movie stars. It was chaos cloaked as security. Americans arrested Americans, sometimes at gunpoint. Entire convoys stalled for hours in the freezing cold as MPs cross-examined drivers. One lieutenant from the 101st Airborne recalled being pulled from his jeep and forced, face down in the snow until he could name the governor of California. Another officer was detained because he pronounced Worcester too correctly as Worcester, betraying an education his interrogator didn't share. Paranoia had become a weapon, and it was working. Just not for the side that invented it. While the Allies turned inward, Skorzeny's name became legend whispered with awe and dread. The man who had once rescued Mussolini was now said to command an invisible army, a phantom force capable of appearing anywhere. British intelligence dubbed him the most dangerous man in Europe. But behind the myth, Skorzeny's Operation Greif, Operation Griffin, was already collapsing. His commandos, scattered behind enemy lines, faced impossible odds. Some were captured within hours. Others survived days in the forests, cold and starving. A few managed to slip back into German territory, their disguises discarded, their nerves shredded. Those less fortunate were not granted the luxury of surrender. At Malmedy, Trois Ponts, Stavelot, and dozens of small villages now swallowed by the snow, captured infiltrators faced summary execution. The Americans, citing the laws of war, treated them not as prisoners but as spies. In December 1944 alone, dozens of Skorzeny's men were shot after hasty field trials. Some begged to die in German uniform. Others were executed still, wearing the stars and stripes of the army they had tried to impersonate. Word of these executions reached Skorzeny within days. He wrote later that he expected the same fate should he fall into enemy hands, and yet he continued to fight. His personal guard destroyed bridges, captured stragglers, and defended crossroads deep in the Ardennes. But without fuel, without air support, and with Allied reinforcements pouring in, the illusion of German victory dissolved. By early January 1945, Hitler's great gamble, the Battle of the Bulge, was bleeding out in the snow. Thousands of German soldiers were dead or captured. Tanks lay burned along the frozen roads to Bastogne. The spearhead that had once threatened Antwerp now staggered backward, crushed under the weight of its own ambition. Operation Greif ended not with a dramatic confrontation, but with quiet surrender. The remaining members of Panzer Brigade, 150, melted back into the shattered lines of the German army. Their mission to sow confusion had succeeded only too well, but at the cost of their own humanity. 2 years after the war, in the aftermath of judgment, Otto Skorzeny stood before an Allied tribunal. The charge: violation of the laws and customs of war, for the use of enemy uniforms during combat. The courtroom buzzed with tension. The man in the dock no longer looked like the myth. The scar that ran from his jaw to his ear, earned in the desperate fighting of 1941, caught the light as he stared down his accusers. The prosecution argued that his commandos had acted as spies, their disguise as a weapon of treachery. But then came the twist, one that history still debates. British officers, including Air Marshal Arthur Tedder, admitted that Allied commandos had occasionally done the same, infiltrated enemy lines wearing German uniforms to gather intelligence. If Skorzeny was guilty, they reasoned, so were they. The tribunal deliberated for days. Then, on September 9, 1947, the verdict was read: not guilty. Skorzeny was acquitted on all major charges. He walked free from the courtroom thinner, older but unbroken. To some, he remained a war criminal who had toyed with moral boundaries. To others, he was a soldier of ruthless genius, a relic of an age when deception had become an art. In the years that followed, he would drift through the shadows of post-war Europe, working as a security consultant, a mercenary, a whisper in the Cold War's darker corridors. But the legend of Operation Greif outlived him. The story of Skorzeny's commandos is not merely one of disguise. It is a reflection of a war where identity itself became a battlefield. It asked a question that remains chilling today. If the uniform no longer defines the soldier, what does? In the frozen woods of the Ardennes, that question turned brother against brother, ally against ally. A misplaced accent could cost a life. A trivia question could determine who walked away. For 3 weeks in the winter of 1944, truth itself became a casualty. And when the snow finally melted, the roads through Belgium were littered not just with burned-out tanks and broken rifles, but with the ghosts of men who fought under the wrong flag, some by choice, some by command, all by deception. Fade to black. By May of 1945, the Reich that had once stretched from the Atlantic to the Volga was nothing more than rubble and echo. Cities lay hollowed by fire. The men who had marched beneath banners of conquest were now ghosts among the ruins. But for Otto Skorzeny, the war did not end. It simply changed shape. A farmhouse near Salzburg. Night. Rain lashes against the shutters. Inside, a single lamp burns over a stack of forged papers. A man in a worn civilian coat signs a new name, Rolf Steinbauer. It is Skorzeny, escaped from an internment camp, slipping across occupied Europe under the protection of old comrades and new benefactors. His escape is as audacious as his wartime raids a fitting final act for a man who built his legend on impossible odds. In the years that followed, Skorzeny became a phantom of post-war Europe, a soldier without a country, yet welcome wherever power needed his expertise. He surfaced in Franco's Spain, living openly under the dictator's protection. He trained Egypt's nascent army in desert warfare. He advised Juan Perón in Argentina. Some whisper he worked for the CIA, others for Mossad. Perhaps as with all myths, the truth lay somewhere in between. What is certain is that his methods, deception, infiltration, unconventional warfare survived long after the war that birthed them. Grainy film reels flicker. American soldiers in mock enemy uniforms, learning sabotage, psychological operations, covert communication. The techniques are familiar, the same playbook written in the frozen forests of the Ardennes. The West had condemned him, yet quietly adopted his doctrine. Fade in, color footage of present-day Ardennes. Morning fog drifts through pine trees. Birds call faintly. The camera glides over quiet crossroads once choked with tanks. Narrator, VO. 80 years have passed. Yet the forests of the Ardennes still whisper their memories. Here, where American and German soldiers once bled into the same snow, truth and illusion still sleep side by side. The earth keeps its secrets well. Every few winters, a rusted Jeep part, a dog tag, a bullet casing rises. To the surface, tiny echoes of the moment when men no longer knew who stood beside the inside. Glass cases hold relics of Operation Greif, faded American jackets with German tags stitched beneath. Photographs of young faces smiling in enemy uniforms. Visitors lean close, reading placards in silence. Narrator, VO. They were soldiers, not monsters. Many were barely 20. They spoke the language of the enemy, but fought for the homeland they'd been told still had a chance. And when that illusion died, they died with it. Their story was buried beneath the triumph of the victors, dismissed as a footnote to the Bulge. Yet in those few weeks of fear and confusion, they had forced the world to look into its own reflection and see what war had made of it. Scene, intercut 1944 and now. Archival black and white shots of snow-covered. Checkpoints dissolve into drone. Footage of modern highways. Trucks roll where convoys once burned. Children play where machine gun nests once stood. Narrator, VO. War fades. The maps change. The uniforms rot. But the questions endure. How do you fight an enemy who looks like you? Who speaks your tongue, wears your flag, salutes your officers? When deception becomes indistinguishable from duty, does truth still matter? Scene. Close-up on old soldier interview, real or recreated. An elderly American veteran stares past the camera, eyes rimmed with age and memory. Veteran. We didn't know who to trust. One day you're sharing rations with a guy, next day he's gone. And they tell you he was German. You start doubting everything, even yourself. Narrator, VO. For many, the Battle of the Bulge was a fight against cold and steel. For others, it was a battle against fear. The fear that the world itself could be counterfeit. Otto Skorzeny legacy monologue. Montage of newspaper headlines. Cold War footage, soldiers in modern camouflage, cyber warfare screens. Narrator, VO. Otto Skorzeny's legacy outlived him not in monuments, but in method. Special forces, psychological operations, misinformation, all born from the seed he planted. Today, wars are fought in data, in propaganda, in pixels. Uniforms are optional. Allegiance is negotiable, and truth still is the first casualty. Final sequence. Camera pulls slowly skyward above the Ardennes forest. Snow falls softly, dissolving into clouds. Narrator, VO. If you listen carefully, you can still hear the engines idling in the fog. The voices asking for the password, the silence that followed when no one could remember what it was supposed to be. Long pause. Narrator, VO. Operation Greif was more than a mission. It was a mirror held up to every army, every nation, every soul that believes victory excuses everything. Because in war, the greatest disguise is the one we wear when we tell ourselves we are the good ones. Music swells, strings and low brass. Archival photos fade across the screen. On-screen text. Dedicated to the soldiers, on both sides, who fought and fell in the winter of '44. Fade to black. Fade in a dim archive room. Dust floats in shafts of light. Hands carefully open an old folder marked Geheime Kommandosache, Operation Greif. Narrator, VO. For decades, these pages lay forgotten reports written in fading ink, stamped with eagles that no longer rule. Inside them are not grand victories, but small confessions. Orders signed in haste. Names crossed out. Men who vanished behind their own disguises. Scene, interior voice from the past. An actor reads from a German soldier's letter, voice trembling slightly. Soldier reading. They told us we would wear the enemy's face for a few days, maybe a week. But when I saw myself in the mirror, in their uniform, I wondered which side I was on at all. Narrator, V.O. He never made it home. The letter was found on his body near Stavolo, December 19th, 1944. His name was Carl Fisher, 21 years old. Scene, modern-day Arlington Cemetery. Camera glides over endless white crosses and stars of David, morning mist curling through silence. Narrator, V.O. Every uniform hides a human being. Every deception hides a truth we're afraid to face. That war blurs right and wrong until neither can be told apart. Scene, the new front. Visual montage. Digital maps, satellites, anonymous hackers behind glowing screens. Misinformation flooding news feeds. Narrator, V.O. 80 years later, deception no longer wears a helmet. It travels through fiber optic, cables, and glowing rectangles. Rumor now moves faster than any tank. And once again, the world must decide what is real and who gets to say so. Scene, quiet reflection. Camera returns to the Ardennes forest. Snowflakes drift through pale sunlight. The wind whispers through pines like distant voices. Narrator, V.O. History does not repeat itself in uniform, but in rhythm, the rhythm of fear, of pride, of human belief. The men of Operation Greif are gone. But their question remains, when the truth becomes a weapon, who will dare to use it honestly? Final scene, monologue closure. Slow zoom out from the forest to a wide aerial view of Europe, glowing faintly under twilight. Narrator, V.O. Perhaps that is the final legacy of the winter of '44, not the battles, not the orders, not the names, but the reminder that in the end, the most dangerous battlefield lies inside the human heart, because the greatest disguise is the one worn by conscience.